Hello, here we go. Let's read the Property Tax Advisory Commission report. Go to this website, and here we go. Let's read it.
New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 1 2 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report January 31, 2020. Initial Recommendations 63 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 5 6 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 7 8 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report Executive Summary. New York City is home to a mosaic of real property, from the iconic skyscrapers that shape its skyline to the varied domiciles that house its 8.6 million residents, the residential dwellings, office buildings, and small business corridors that line its streets contribute to New York's diversity of industry, rich culture, and vibrancy of its neighborhoods. Though the topography of the city's properties may vary from neighborhood to neighborhood, there is one common thread that stitches most of them together: the obligation to pay property taxes. While this connection may bind properties together at an elemental level, commonalities beyond that can be quite limited. A close look at New York City's property tax system will show that there can be vast differences in how properties are classified, valued, and assessed, lending credence to the widely held characterization that the system is overly complex, opaque, and arcane. The real property tax is an integral part of local government budgets. Revenues derived from them help fund essential public services such as education, public safety, infrastructure, and much more. In New York City, the property tax comprises approximately 45% of the city's tax revenue, enabling the delivery of top-notch services to those who live, work, and visit the city. As a result, it is difficult to overstate the importance of the property tax, but the impact on those who bear the responsibility of paying it must not be overlooked. Any property tax system should be fair, predictable, and transparent, and should not induce displacement among long-term homeowners and renters from the neighborhoods they've called home. These principles should be at the center of any system's design, but this seemingly universal sentiment is constrained by a fundamental challenge: achieving a delicate balance between sustaining and enhancing essential government services that city residents expect, while ensuring that the tax burden does not place an enormous strain on household budgets. Designing the ideal property tax system has confounded public officials at all levels and branches of government. For decades, indeed, in the lead up to the enactment of today's system, property tax reform engendered fierce debate among policymakers as they struggled with designing a system that would not saddle homeowners with exorbitant tax bills. The long road to property tax reform, which followed the foundational 1975 Court of Appeals decision Hellerstein v. Assessor of the Town of Islip, that essentially struck down the use of fractional assessments in valuing properties, took 6 years and was marked by legislative extensions, creation of a temporary legislative commission to study reform proposals, a gubernatorial veto of reform legislation, and an override of that veto. What emerged from the tumultuous process was today's system, made up of 4 property classes with market valuation restrictions. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 9 Different assessment ratios, year-over-year caps and growth transition mechanisms, a complicated class share system, and more. The system was not a panacea. In fact, just 1 decade after its enactment, it was criticized for causing inequities among property owners. In establishing the New York City Real Property Tax Reform Commission in 1993, the last government-appointed commission to study New York City's property tax system, then Mayor David Dinkins spoke of the need for property tax reform, saying that, after a decade of experience, a number of profound problems are visible. The commission cited many issues that plague the system, e.g., the treatment of coop and condominium owners relative to owners of 1-3 family homes. The commission's report was issued on December 30, 1993, very close to the official start of a new mayoral administration. While the 1993 commission's work did not trigger a wholesale reform of the system, it is believed to have aided in the enactment of the cooperative and condominium property tax abatement program, Coop Condo Tax Abatement, in 1996. With no significant reform effort underway, the discrepancies persisted and only became more pronounced with the passage of time. Today, the chorus of voices decrying the system as inequitable has multiplied. While there is little debate over the need for reform, there is considerable debate about the extent to which the system unfairly treats certain property classes and properties within those classes, as well as the prescriptive remedies needed to rationalize the system. On May 31, 2018, Mayor Bill de Blasio and City Council Speaker Corey Johnson established the New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform, the commission, in order to make the system simpler, clearer, and fairer, while ensuring that there is no reduction in revenue used to fund essential city services. The commission's mandate was.
Did you hear that? Do not change the revenue. It's amazing. That means that the 6% growth has to continue. People, wake up. Someone's got to stop this train. It's going to hit it's going to cause a wreck. All right, continue. Listen to these words.
To evaluate all aspects of the property system, including, but not limited to, the property tax classification system, methods of determining property market values and assessments, treatment of property value increases, relief for low-income and senior homeowners, and the calculation of tax rates. In empaneling the commission, Mayor de Blasio and Speaker Johnson sought to assemble a group of experts with diverse backgrounds who could recommend a comprehensive and thoughtful overhaul of the system. The commission held 5 public hearings across the city, 3 hearings with invited experts, and 2 public meetings to hear an overview of the current system and the VAR's policy levers to consider while pursuing reform. The feedback received from the public and experts generally centered on the amount of property taxes paid relative to market value, comparisons of property tax bills across neighborhoods, and difficulty with understanding how the system works. Many of the issues highlighted by those who testified could be traced back to flaws in current law, including the undervaluation of some coops and condominiums as a result of state law restrictions that require that they be valued as if they were rental properties rather than based on comparable sales, the assessed value growth caps that have caused distortions in the effective tax rates, taxes paid per $100 of sales-based market value of 1-3 family homes, properties that have experienced significant depreciation have lower effective tax rates than new homes or homes whose value has remained relatively flat. The commission spent more than a year analyzing data and examining various reform models that comport with its mandate. Based on the extensive deliberations of commission members, ex officio members, and staff, the commission is advancing initial recommendations in this preliminary report that address inequities in the system and provide the commission's appointing authorities and policymakers with a roadmap to reform. 10 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. The commission reached consensus on 10 initial recommendations. 1. The commission recommends moving coops, condominiums, and rental buildings with up to 10 units into a new residential class along with 1-3 family homes. The property tax system would continue to consist of 4 classes of property: residential, large rentals, utilities, and commercial.
This might be good to put courts and condos in class 1. That could be good, depending on what else they do.
Commercial. 2. The commission recommends using a sales-based methodology to value all properties in the residential class. 3. The commission recommends assessing every property in the residential class at its full market value.
That again is exactly what we recommend, is let's move everyone to full market value, right? To however way we do it, whether we change the assessment ratio to lower, which would do the exact same thing, or we just make the number full. But obviously the tax rate has to change, and people should watch that.
3. The commission recommends assessing every property in the residential class at its full market value. 4. The commission recommends that annual market value changes in the new residential class be phased in over 5 years at a rate of 20% per year, and that assessed value growth caps should be eliminated. 5. The commission recommends. You see
that elimination, they just slipped that in. An elimination of the assessed value growth is, they noticed you slipped that one in, but that's going to take away all limits. So why does the state have a 2% tax growth limit and we, New York City, have nothing now? They're trying to remove even this 6%. that's a little scary. People should watch this part, and unless they recommend some limit, but let's see what they recommend.
Be eliminated. 5. The Commission recommends creating a partial homestead exemption for primary resident owners with income below a certain threshold. The exemption would be available to all eligible primary resident owners in the residential class and would replace the current coop condo tax abatement. 6.
That might be good too, because we have this STAR program that's not a homestead exemption. It's not specific to New York City. It's a state STAR, which is school tax assessment relief, but that's not a homestead exemption, and New York City should have that, and that might be a good thing. So continue.
Abatement. 6. The Commission recommends creating a circuit breaker within the property tax system to lower the property tax burden on low-income primary resident owners based on the ratio of property tax paid to income.
So now every person's income has to be disclosed, or not every, but everyone that wants to apply for this low income, because we have this already for senior homeowner exemption, but now they're saying that everyone can get a low income exemption.
The property tax burden on low-income primary resident owners based on the ratio of property tax paid to income. 7. The Commission recommends replacing the current class share system with a system that prioritizes predictable and transparent tax rates for property owners. The new system would freeze the relationship of tax rates among the tax classes for 5-year periods, after which time the city would conduct a mandated study to analyze if adjustments need to be made to maintain consistency in the share of taxes relative to fair market value borne by each tax class. 8. The Commission recommends.
Yeah, we have to be careful here, because right now class 1 is by law paying 15% of the total class or tax levy that they call it. A tax levy is the total amount of tax, and this doesn't make it clear what would happen. They just say consistent, which doesn't make any. We need details on this, because what if they make it 50%? Class 1 pays 50% of the tax levy. So it seems like the exact same thing, the class share, but it doesn't give any numbers. No, predictable doesn't mean anything. We need, an actual value.
10C in the share of taxes relative to fair market value borne by each tax class. 8. The Commission recommends that current valuation methods should be maintained for properties not in the new residential class, rental buildings with more than 10 units, utilities, and commercial. 9. The Commission recommends a gradual transition to the new system for current owners, with an immediate transition into the new system whenever a property in the new residential class is sold. 10. The Commission recommends instituting comprehensive reviews of the property tax system every 10 years. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 11. Further details on the Commission's recommendations can be found in the main body.
What you'll notice is there's no limit. They have no limit, no 2% cap on growth, nothing. It seems as if this report is just removing limits also. And it doesn't talk anything about abatements and exemptions and 421A and all the billions and billions of dollars that are given to developers. And it doesn't talk about the NYU and the Columbia property tax exemption, where NYU and Columbia pay no property tax at all, even though they're infinitely wealthy with endowments of $11 billion or $12 billion in NYU's endowment. Columbia is 11 or 12 billion according to the reports, and the billions and billions of dollars that NYU has in their endowment. They don't pay anything, but you notice the Commission doesn't even talk about it. Let's see if they say anything in the details. Probably not.
Further details on the Commission's recommendations can be found in the main body of this report. This is a preliminary report, and a final report will follow. This preliminary report is presented as a framework for reform and is intended to elicit comments from the general public and all stakeholders so that a set of final recommendations can be issued. To that end, the Commission will hold another round of hearings, one in each borough, to solicit feedback on The contents of this preliminary report, the hearing schedule is being developed and, once finalized, will be available on the Commission website at this URL. The Commission encourages members of the public to attend the hearings and present their opinions, as the Commission continues to engage the public for comment on the 10 initial recommendations outlined in this report. It will also be meeting regularly to reach consensus on outstanding issues and additional items that will be raised through the stakeholder engagement and public hearing processes. For example, the Commission recognizes that the incidence of the property tax on renters is a complex issue, and experts convened at public hearings sponsored by the Commission confirmed that it is hard to systematically measure and more work needs to be done. Additional issues that the Commission will discuss include, but are not limited to, ending fractional assessments for properties not in the new residential class, the length of the period for transitioning to the new system, and defining the parameters of the targeted owner relief programs. Central to this next phase of the Commission's work will be to address these.
There's another one. They don't talk about renters at all. And no details, no numbers, nothing.
Relief programs. Central to this next phase of the Commission's work will be to address these issues within the mandate to ensure that reform does not result in a reduction in revenue. For almost 40 years, New York City's property tax system.
Well, they keep saying this reduction in revenue, but they're not saying the reduction in revenue growth. It's not as if the property tax is a certain amount and we constantly pay that. It's growing at 6%. So they have to say that. It has to say no reduction in property tax growth, right? Or revenue. They just say revenue as if it's just a static number. It's not. Anyway, look at S7000A Wikipedia page. You can see that the expenditures are growing at 6% and the tax is growing at 6%. And then you heard in the report itself, it said property tax is 45% of the revenue, which I didn't even know. I thought it was lower than that. But of expenditure, it's 30% and growing. But of revenue, I guess we have to see what they consider revenue, because there is other income coming to New York City that's probably not generated by New York City, by federal money and things like that.
For almost 40 years, New York City's property tax system has dictated how myriad properties are taxed, and its effects, for better or worse, have affected all corners of the city. The city's elected leadership determined that it was time for a serious review. The Commission has undertaken that review with diligence, thoughtfulness, and creativity, and presents this preliminary report to guide serious discussions on how best to reform the system. 12 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 13. 14 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Introduction. 16 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Hearings and meetings. The Commission held its first public meeting on July 20, 2018. At that meeting, the Department of Finance provided a primer about the current property tax system. Point 2. The second meeting, held on September 4, 2018, featured a presentation from the City Council Finance Division team on the levers that can be used to reform the system. 3. The Commission then held a series of public hearings in each borough to solicit specific feedback about the challenges taxpayers face in neighborhoods across the city. The first such hearing was held on Staten Island on September 27, 20,184, followed by Queens on October 3, 20,185, the Bronx on October 11, 20,186, Brooklyn on October 15, 20,187, and Manhattan on October 23, 20,188. The Commission then convened hearings of experts on a variety of subjects that Commission members wanted to hear more about. Who pays the property tax, and how the property tax impacts land and housing prices and the rent charged to tenants living in rental properties. December 13, 2018, available at this URL. 18 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 2, a brief history. Under New York's municipal home rule structure, the state retains authority of New York City's over major changes in taxation for New York City. Point 9. This section provides a short property tax system history. New York City property tax system, and a condensed summary of the important changes that have occurred throughout the years 1940s to 1960s. New York State Real Property Tax Law, RPTL, which currently governs how property taxes are administered in New York State, first became effective in 1959. Prior to that, property tax administration was controlled by a variety of boards, as well as federal, state, and local assessment practices. The primary objective of the RPTL was to consolidate all the general laws relating to real property, assessment, and taxation into a single law, and it served as a simplified and chronological language upon which future amendments were based. 10 RPTL also governs most methods by which New York City is allowed to administer and collect property taxes. In New York City, specifically,
most methods, read that, most methods. So there are things like assessment ratio that's controlled by the New York City Department of Finance, and the rate, which is set by the council. And they may be involved in the assessment ratio too. It's not clear to me, but it's not state law, right? So that's why they say most methods, most.
In New York City, specifically, there was a major housing shortage following World War II. This shortage occurred both because housing production had stalled during the war in order to redirect materials and labor to the war effort, and many soldiers returning from the front sought homes in the city. 11 To ease the burden the shortage was imposing on homeowners, who were seeing the values of their properties, and thus their taxes, rise sharply, the city followed a policy of ignoring increases in the market values of those homes. 12 To ease the burden on renters, the city readopted rent control policies during World War II that had first been adopted in 1920, but had expired in 1929.13. As the shortage eased in the late 1940s and 1950s, the city faced another crisis, the flight of the middle class to the suburbs. 14 To encourage homeowners to remain in the city, New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 19 froze their assessments, reasoning in part that the policy achieved parity between homeowners and renters still protected by rent control. 15 In 1960, the state legislature reconstituted the State Board of Equalization and Assessment as a permanent agency within the Office for Local Government. 16 Known today as the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services, ORPTS, the office determines final special franchise value (ES) and state equalization rates, which are ratios of assessed value over the market value of real property. 17 The equalization rates serve as a measure of a municipality's level of assessment, which determines how school district or county taxes are distributed. Distributing the tax burden based on assessed values would be incorrect when assessed values relate differently to market value. Equalization rates are used to translate assessed values into market values for the purpose of distributing the tax levy. 18 1970s tax reform and its aftermath. Like New York City, many jurisdictions in New York State assessed property values at a fraction of their market value, and the practice led to inequities in many towns and cities across the state. 19 In 1974, Jerome and Pauline Hellerstein sued the town of Islip, arguing that fractional assessments violated Section 306 of the RPTL 20, which mandated that all real property be assessed at full market value. In 1975, New York's Court of Appeals agreed with the plaintiffs, finding that the fractional assessment system would lead to, and masked significant inequities. Key percentage of undervaluation is rarely a matter of common knowledge, so that it is extremely difficult to ascertain whether there is uniformity in the proportion, or whether through incompetence, favoritism, or corruption of the assessors, some portions of the tax-paying body are bearing the other's burdens, as between either individuals or local groups. 21 The court acknowledged, however, the fiscal chaos. 22 That might result from the immediate upending of the assessment practice, and required Islip to reassess all of its properties at full value within 36 months, allotting what it saw as a reasonable time period for orderly compliance. The court's decision affected the whole state, however, and the state legislature granted itself a 4-year extension to meet the court's order, as it needed more time to sort out a difficult political situation. In 1977, Governor Hugh Carey created a temporary commission on real property taxation to explore means of protecting homeowners from large tax increases. Legislators understood that the full market value taxation Hellerstein called for was likely to cause political backlash because a state assembly task force that studied the issue in 1979 found that the Hellerstein mandate would double property tax bills for homeowners in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. 23 As homeowners began to voice their concerns, members of the New York Senate and Assembly concluded that the change ordered by the Heller-Stein Court was not politically viable. 24. 20 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. After granting itself several additional extensions to study the issue, the legislature passed a tax reform bill known as S7000A in 1981, overriding a veto from Governor Hugh Carey, who argued that the bill would result in the continuation of the inequitable, chaotic, and haphazard assessment practices which homeowners have been subjected to for many years. S7000A repealed Section 306 of the RPTL 25 and allowed all municipalities, aside from New York City, and municipalities in Nassau County, to continue the FRAC-tional assessment practices the court had struck down as violating that section. 26. In New York City and Nassau County, however, S7000A set up 4 distinct classes for 1 to 3 family homes. Class 1, larger residential buildings, both rental and coops and condominiums. Class 2, utilities. Class 3, and commercial property. Class 4, and allowed each class to be assessed at different percentages of estimated market value. The 2 different assessment systems, one for New York City and Nassau County and one for the rest of the state, were the result of a compromise between Governor Carey's desire for full value assessment and the state Senate's aim of making as few changes to assessment practices as possible. S7000A set up a class share system to allocate the tax levy among the classes. The system used 1981 as the base year for the class shares, perpetuating the tax advantage. Class 1 properties accumulated up to that year. 27 The class shares are adjusted each year for changes to each tax class share of market value due to relative market value growth. Shares are further adjusted for physical changes such as new construction, demolition, restoration of properties to the assessment roll, and properties moving from one tax class to another. Additionally, the City Council could increase or decrease the resulting class shares by up to 5%. 28 The City Council used its discretion to favor Class 1. 29 At the same time, it provided City Council discretion on class shares. S7000A required ORPTS to survey market values every 2 years and adjust class shares based on changes in the market value represented by each class. 30 By 1989, ORPTS had completed no surveys and market value shares had remained at their 1981 level, favoring Class 1, which had appreciated faster than the other classes. In 1989, the state legislature put in place the current class share system by setting the base year for the calculation to city fiscal year 1990, essentially preserving the status quo at the time. The annual growth rate of class shares was capped at 5%. The city may request legislative authorization from the state to lower the class share cap below 5%, and the City Council has the discretion to distribute the excess share to other tax classes to the benefit of Class 1 properties. S7000A capped the growth of assessed values due to market conditions, so-called equalization changes, at no more than 6% in any 1 year or no more than 20% cumulatively over any 5 years. 31
This is amazing how many words they can use to describe the class share system and the assessment caps. It's pretty simple. Class 1 pays 15% of the tax levy, about 15%, and the assessed values can't grow more than 20% in 5 years. I don't know how they make it so complicated. But if you notice, I don't think the report ever even mentions 15% or the actual number. This is amazing. You can make anything into gobbledygook by just keep talking.
Growth of assessed values due to market conditions, so-called equalization changes, at no more than 6% in any 1 year or no more than 20% cumulatively over any 5 years. 31 S7000A also provided a tax advantage to buildings held in coup and condo form through Section 581 of RPTL, which requires the city to value those properties as if they were rental properties rather than by looking at the recent New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 21, Sales of Comparable Units. 32 Specifically, Section 581 states, notwithstanding any other provision of law, real property, owned or leased by a coup corporation or on a condominium basis shall be assessed for purposes of this chapter at a sum not exceeding the assessment which would be placed upon such parcel were the parcel not owned or leased by a Coop Corporation or on a condominium basis. 33. To satisfy Section 581, the New York City Department of Finance (DOF) identifies comparable rental buildings based on factors such as location, amenities, and size. DOF then uses the net rental income of the comparable properties, or gross rental income for smaller buildings in Class 2 to determine the value of Coop and condo buildings. In practice, this statutory requirement results in undervaluation of new and high-priced buildings that lack an appropriate set of comparable rental properties. 34. The caps are set at no more than 8% over 1 year, or no more than 30% cumulatively over any 5 years. 35. In addition, in 1996, the state legislature created the Coop condo tax abatement, intended to better align taxation of Class 2 buildings held in Coop or condo form with Class 1.36. Currently, this abatement is only available to primary resident owners. 37. In addition to the Coop condo tax abatement, NYS tax law contains a variety of other tax expenditure programs prohibiting tax exemptions and abatements. The purpose of the programs include providing tax relief to property owners based on income, age, disability, and veteran status. 38. They also provide property tax breaks to businesses for economic development and to developers for the development and rehabilitation of multifamily housing. In the early 1990s, assessed value growth caps were enacted for rental buildings of 4 to 10 units in Coop and condo buildings with 2 to 10 units, which apply to equalization changes only, not changes due to physical alter. 22. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. 23. 24. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. The current property tax system calculation overview. To calculate the property tax liability for any given property, the New York City Department of Finance (DOF) undertakes 8 steps. 1. DOF categorizes the property within one of the 4 property classes. 2. DOF estimates the market value as specifically defined under state law. DOF value of the property. 3. DOF applies assessment ratios to determine assessed value, AV. 4. DOF applies growth caps and phase-ins to the AV to calculate billable AV. 5. DOF subtracts exemptions to arrive at taxable billable AV. 6. DOF multiplies taxable billable AV by the class tax rate to determine the tax liability. 7. DOF calculates the final tax bill by subtracting tax abatements from the tax liability. 39. 8. DOF administers billing and collection. 39. NYCDEPT of Finance Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. 25. Step 1. Classification of the property into one of the 4 classes. Class 1 originally consisted of 1-3 family homes, but over time, small condo developments and other property types were added by statute, including some types of mixed-use properties, bungalows, and vacant land. 40. Class 2 consists of all other residential properties not in Class 1, such as rental buildings.
You hear that? Some mixed-use buildings are Class 1. So if you go on Court Street in Brooklyn, there's all these old Class 1 buildings that became businesses on the first floor, and they're all Class 1. You know, as long as they're under 3 units, that's a good deal. You know, you can get business income and get Class 1 treatment. They've been doing it for 40 years or however long this change happened. I think there's other places too, probably.
Vacant land. 40. Class 2 consists of all other residential properties not in Class 1, such as rental buildings. Coops and condos. Class 3 includes property of regulated utilities and special franchise properties they hold, such as cable television providers that place their equipment on or under city streets. Class 4 consists of all other properties, which range from gas stations and stores, to factories and warehouses, to hotels and office skyscrapers. 41. Table 1 summarizes the distribution of taxable parcels and residential units among the 4 classes. Table 1, Universe of Taxable Parcels, FY 2019. Tax class property type parcels residential units. Three-family homes 703,206 1,095,061 2 rental buildings, coops, condos 670,500 1,921,292 3 utilities 294 commercial 97,571 Total 1,471,567 Source, New York City Department of Finance, Division of Tax Policy Analytical File. Notes, restricted to taxable billable properties. Class 1 also includes several other small residential property types, excludes Class 2 condos smaller than 100 square feet, e.g., storage units, parking. Vacant land is in Class 1 or Class 4. Class 4 includes some utilities. A parcel is defined as a unit for coops and as a tax lot for all other property types, with tax lot defined as unique combination of borough, block and lot identifiers, or a BBL. 40 Act of December 3, 1981, ch. 1057, 1981 NY Laws 220, McKinney, codified at Section 1802, Governor's Bill Jacket P. 31, IBO, 25 years after, Section 7000A, Supranote at 15. 41 For a detailed definition of tax classes, see NYCDOF Annual Report of the New York City Property Tax, Fiscal Year 2018, Appendix A, https www.nyc.gov/assets/finance/downloads/pdf/reports/property_fi18.pdf 26 New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report. Step 2, Estimation of DOF value. DOF estimates the value of a property through a variety of generally accepted methods, depending upon the type of property. There are 4 main approaches. 42. 1. Comparable sales determines value based on recent sales of comparable properties. 2. Net income capitalization determines value based on the ratio between a property's current net income and a capitalization rate, which is designed to approximate an investor's expected annual rate of return on an income-producing property. 3. Gross income multiplier determines value based on a multiple of gross income. 4. Cost estimates value using the value of the land plus the cost of constructing the buildings and other improvements on the land, adjusted for depreciation. This approach is used for utilities. The valuation of special franchise property is determined by the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services, ORPTS. Table 2 summarizes DOF valuation methods by property type. Table 2, DOF valuation methods. Tax class property type methodology for computing DOF value. 1. Three-family homes comparable sales, net income capitalization of comparable rental, cooperatives and condominiums, 11 plus units. Income. 2. Large rentals, 11 plus units, net income capitalization, gross income multiplier based on available rent. 2A, 2B small rentals, 4-10 units. L income, small cooperatives and condominiums, 2-10 gross income multiplier based on comparable. 2C. Units, rental income, cost valuation of special franchise property. 3 utilities determined by ORPTS. 4 commercial property net income capitalization. Source, New York City Department of Finance. Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. 42 NYCDEPT of Finance. Presentation, New York Property Tax System Background, July 20, 2018, available at this URL. New York City Advisory Commission on Property Tax Reform Preliminary Report 27. There are multiple legal constraints that DOF faces in valuing different property types. Section 581 of the New York State Real Property Tax Law, RPTL, requires that coops and condos be valued as if they were rental properties. This can result in 43. Undervaluation, especially for high-end parcels, due to difficulty in finding appropriate comparable rental buildings. Additionally, comparable rental buildings may have income constrained by rent stabilization laws, which further contributes to undervaluation. Most 2A, 2B small rentals are not legally required to file detailed accountings of income and expenses. Therefore, income is estimated from parcels that do file, and a multiplier is derived from typical sales within a neighborhood. The courts have found the use of anticipated future expected income, i.e., discounted cash flow method to value income-producing properties as speculative, and have expressed a preference for the direct capitalization of current earned income. The mass appraisal DOF conducts for commercial properties is Consistent with the court's preference and uses current income to derive capitalization rates, these rates are higher than market capitalization rates utilized by single parcel appraisers and less likely to be challenged. Market capitalization rates include speculative purchases made with the intention of building conversion, renovation, and/or increases in resale value, which DOF does not incorporate into its valuations. Moreover, DOF does not receive detailed lease structure information from commercial properties, which can affect a parcel's market sale price by constraining future income. DOF derives cap.
Did you hear that? The courts don't like future value to be used, but in Class 1, they're definitely using future value. People are buying properties with the intent to renovate, and they're paying more for them, but yet doesn't seem, the courts don't seem to affect that. Maybe someone should bring class action suit. We should bring a class action suit against the Department of Finance about that, that they're putting market values that are future market values on a Class 1. That's an interesting idea.
Information from commercial properties, which can affect a parcel's market sale price by constraining future income. DOF derives capitalization rates for large apartment buildings in a similar manner to commercial properties. Lease structures may play a lesser role in determining a large rental building's market sale price. Given the short-term nature of the leases, the anticipated stability of the income stream may be considered in deriving a capitalization rate. However, developing mass appraisal assumptions about expectations of future income increases, which are characteristic of speculative purchases involving renovations or science, is problematic and not favored by the courts. Step 3, application of assessment ratios. Actual AV. The calculation of taxable value starts by multiplying assessment ratios by DOF value to obtain actual AVs. The DOF commissioner has the discretion to set the assessment ratios within each class. 44 Between 1991 and 2007, the assessment ratio for.
Did you hear that? The Department of Finance commissioner has a discretion to set the assessment ratios between each class. That's a critical thing that no one's even talking about. That is the Department of Finance commissioner's discretion. So if he set the assessment ratio, he or she set the assessment ratio to a low number, everyone would get full value, just the way Nassau County does. 0.1% assessment ratio would do it. No one is assessed below 0.1%, or make it keep it lower if they are, right? This is that's what Nassau County does, and then the rate would have to go up, and people should watch that.
Assessment ratio for Class 1 was 8% in 2007.
Yeah, this report is very long, so let's pause it here and hear people's feedback. But what we do see is there's no caps, nothing. So people should fight for